Welcome to Saturday Morning Trek, just one of many podcasts on Trek FM. If you'd like to help keep Star Trek discussion coming your way each day, consider becoming a network patron through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/trekfm and find out how you can become part of the team. That's patreon.com/trekfm.
This is DC Fontana. You're listening to Trek FM.
Now for action and adventure. Future's here for us to see. It's 2200 AD.
Their mission to fight injustice, to right that which is wrong, and
to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Welcome to Saturday Morning Trek. Join us at Trek FM as we harken back to the days of wood panel dens, console televisions, and all manner of animated spacefaring pop music bands. I'm Aaron Harvey, and today we have two very special guests, Neil Bulk and Mike Matessino, from LaLaLand Records to discuss the recently released Star Trek The Animated Series soundtrack.
That's impossible.
I find this scientifically fascinating.
Yeah, it does sound impossible. The Filmation library has changed hands many times, and no masters of the soundtrack exist, as far as we know. But, be that as it may, part of the CD set, Star Trek, the 50th Anniversary Collection of Musical Rarities from across the Star Trek universe, comes with the most rare, the Animated Series soundtrack. Before Neil and Mike join me in the wood panel den today, let me give you a little brief bio of Ray Ellis, the man who wrote the animated series music, and when I talk to Mike and Neil, we'll dive more into the specifics. If you look at the music credits for the animated series, they list Yvette Blaze and Jeff Michael, when in fact, that's a pseudonym for jazz musician Ray Ellis, who was moonlighting from his regular musical publishing company and wanted to remain anonymous. Ray Ellis was born in 1923. He was a record producer, arranger, and conductor. The orchestration for Billie Holiday's Lady in Satin probably is his best-known work in jazz, and he wrote two NBC Today Show themes that were used from 1971 to 1985, and it still pops up now and then. And of course, he wrote most of the music for Filmation from 1968 to 1982, for shows like Fantastic Voyage, Arc 2, Jason of Star Command, ISIS, and pretty much anything else Filmation that was musical. So, without further ado, let me welcome Neil and Mike into the Trek FM wood panel den. Good morning. I'm really happy to have you here and talk about something we never thought would actually happen, an animated series soundtrack.
Well, it happened.
Neil, can you tell us a little bit about LaLaLand Records and sort of how you got involved with doing this 50th anniversary project?
Well, LaLaLand is one of the specialty soundtrack labels. There's Entrada, there's Critterland, there's LaLaLand. Perez Saraband has a limited special edition soundtrack. I don't even know how to describe it. It's a label that specializes in limited edition soundtrack releases.
Awesome.
And we both have worked over the years on various soundtrack and Star Trek albums for these labels. We've worked on, Mike, you were on all 10 films, weren't you?
Yeah, I think so. All 10 feature films. I have to say that I think I've been doing things for LaLaLand for over 10 years now. And they did have a sort of a penchant for fantasy film and science fiction releases and monster movies, that kind of thing early on. They gradually sort of expanded their palette and kind of took all genres, but they also put out albums for new films. And, so they've got a wide range of releases and have been very, very successful. But the main thing to point out is that within the sort of catalog soundtrack community and attempts by all the labels, and Neil, you remember this, Paramount was a closed door when you came on the scene. We were getting nothing from them, basically. So it was, all of the Star Trek was just sort of untouchable. We didn't have anything except the original albums, except for one expansion of Star Trek: The Motion Picture that Sony Music had done in 1999. And it was actually another label that Neil didn't mention, but probably should have, Film Score Monthly, which was run by Lucas Kendall, and that label, and Lucas really kind of laid the groundwork for this whole little industry, this little corner of the business that we work in, with expanding scores and putting out things that have never been released, searching for classic material and having it see the light of day for the first time. And Lucas, being a big fan of Star Trek, was the one that kind of broke the door down with Paramount and started getting things going there, and if I'm remembering it correctly. And then, of course, high on his list was to start tackling all the Star Trek music from the movies, and then that led to dealing with CBS for all the television music. And we now, in the last, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years, have had so much Star Trek music. Now it's just really just unbelievable. If you look back 10 years ago, we had nothing.
Yeah, it was. I was helping Lucas in 2008, December 2008. We were running errands, and one of the errands we had to do, he's like, "Oh, we have to go to Paramount," and we went to Paramount Pictures. And this was, as you were saying, Paramount. You couldn't get into Paramount, but suddenly, things were happening, and we went to Paramount and picked up tapes. And what were the tapes? They were Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, which was that was the first expanded score that we put out. And I'm like, holy smokes, here we are holding Star Trek II tapes, and we never looked back.
Was it in big metal cans, or is that, I don't know how they hold their audio compared to their video?
That's film. Film is usually shipped in the big metal cans. These are they were just cardboard boxes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, nothing fancy.
How did you get involved with the animated series? What was who brought that up? Was that your guys' idea, or did somebody else come to you and say, "Hey, we'd really like to try and get this music out there"?
Well, I think that we all knew, when you're tackling Star Trek, you want to tackle everything, and so you want to get the animated series. The problem is, it doesn't exist. The tapes don't. Everybody knows. Like, everybody goes, "Hey, that's a great idea. You should put out the animated series." Well, of course, we should put out the animated series. You've put out the original series music. You've put out Next Gen. You put out Deep Space Nine. You've put it all out. The big gaping hole is animated. Problem is, like I said, it doesn't exist. So we knew that the stems survived, and what the stems are it's the completed episode, synced to picture, the final audio, music, dialogue, and effects, but they're each on their own track. When you play all three, it's the final show. Mm-hmm. But you can, in the computer, you can turn off the dialogue and effects and be left with just the music track. But since it's the actual final episode, the music is completely edited, and the volume is all over the map. It goes up, it goes down, it gets, and this is because it has to compete with dialogue and effects.
Right. It's the same thing we do when we edit our podcast.
Exactly.
Basically.
So you'll put in the music and you'll bring the music down.
Yep.
So in this case, it was, in this case, we have the music, it doesn't exist in any listenable form. So then it became, well, somebody has to go ahead and cut this and try and figure it out. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay. I think Luke and I both were like, well, let's see what we can do on this. And I was like, let me look at some of the cue sheets, some of the surviving paperwork, and see what can be figured out. And none of it worked. I made an entire spreadsheet that I just discarded of where each cue was in every episode, and it was useless.
Yeah, you were showing me earlier during our prep the sheet that just had all of these numbers that didn't seem to correspond to anything.
Those are the cue sheets, and those are legal documents made to make sure the composers are paid, properly for their for the music. And I'm sure the timings, ultimately were correct, but it didn't work for anything that I was trying to do. And so it really became a matter of just listening to the music to every episode, saying, okay, this little section here is this piece, this little section here, and figuring out which sounds the best. It was a lot of comparisons and listening, and then I've finally wound up with about 30 minutes of music all. I know I'm probably skipping a bunch of steps here.
What you're skipping, Neil, is the fact that it couldn't have been done by just anybody. It had to be done by someone who already had this music in his head. And that's not just you. I mean, there are a lot of people who do, myself included, but I could not even imagine doing this. So you would have to actually listen to the music score for every episode, and when you hear something, you'll have to line that up with the same music in another episode, and then, how many episodes did you actually have stems on?
I think it was about 19 or 20.
So almost the entire series, and a lot of that, it's all basically library music, used over and over. We all know some of the big familiar ones, and you think, okay, animated Star Trek. So there's a handful of us that knew this. I think even Lucas was daunted by this, as big a Star Trek fan as he is, and didn't want to try it.
You mean the music I hear when I fall asleep at night? That music?
The music that's stuck in your head, yes.
Yes.
It's an earworm. It's like that's from Star Trek 2, the earworm. So, but yeah. So I mean, but Neil just is so focused. Although still, it's like I know he's done really crazy things before that I've been involved in, and I'm always just astounded at, how did you ever do this? How, and I mean, listen to it over and over and over, and there's probably just, you reach a point in a day where you've just had enough and you have to leave it for a while. But I mean, to actually go through this, and then, in a stem, especially from an older project like that, you're also going to get dialogue and sound effects kind of bleeding onto the music track, and we can do some things to minimize that, but he had choices and always had to make the right choice, and with nothing to guide him, no sense of what the original recording was like, no sense of no sheet music to refer to or anything. You had to just go by, well, what he thought was, this is the most complete version of this cue, okay, and then set it aside, then go on to the next one, and okay, make sure that we've sort of covered everything in the series. I think we pretty much had. There's some stuff that's very unfamiliar to me, but all the familiar stuff is there. And then how to program it and make it into something that's going to satisfy people who've wanted this for 45 years. So
it sounds like a much more complicated version of sort of what I've done to put together music for the show, where I've just sort of found all the episodes where they're not speaking and just sort of glue that music together to kind of create something that...
Well, the advantage here is that we had the individual components, so I could get rid of the dialogue and I could get rid of the effects. So on occasion, the effects would actually be dubbed into the music track. I was like, oh, can't use that.
Oh.
Yeah, that happened on occasion. But yeah, it was daunting. It was the most I've ever worked for 30 minutes of music. and Mike's not kidding. I could do an episode a day. That was my limit.
Yeah.
I was like, I will cut this, I will get this all done, but then I have to move on to something else because I can't just sit here and work on this all day because it will drive me crazier.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who want they want it reanimated and rescored, where the only thing that you keep is the audio of the actors. But I don't know. I still have a fondness for the animation style and the music, and the music really fits really well with that, just because it has enough of the 1970s in it to place it in the right time period. But Ray Ellis, the composer, had a big band background, so it had that really interesting kind of swing feel to it at the same time.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed it, and it is certainly unique, and it screams Star Trek to me, just as much as anything from the original series.
I'd agree with that, and I do remember some of the same music being used on other shows by the same producers, including live-action shows.
Arc 2 log, entry 93. We are in Sector 9, Area 15, with the best assignment we've had in months. 2 days of rest and recreation at a beautiful oasis. And we sure have earned it.
It's beautiful. What kind of people could have built it to touch even a starship with grace and beauty?
So, to finally even hear it on its own was a treat. That we even got that far, that we actually had that. I mean, we're lucky that those stems existed. I mean, you would really expect that would not have even been saved, that they just would have had a music and effects track put together to use for foreigns, and then you'd have the English version, just a mono comp of it all. But, so we were lucky that the stems even existed. Otherwise, this would not have been possible at all.
Is there any clue what happened to the original tape or?
Well, no one would ever thought it would be needed for anything. So most stuff from any production gets tossed, at the end when they're done with it. And it's that kind of thing. Neil, do you know where that was recorded?
I was told it was recorded in France.
So then you're all dealing with that problem. As soon as you have something like that, look, even John Barry scored a Moonraker, was recorded in France. Those scoring masters just don't exist anywhere.
Wow.
So weird things happen and nobody thinks.
Yeah.
We're better at it now, and with things being digital, somebody usually has something. But
right.
To go back, that's welcome to our nightmare. That's what we do. And when you find something, it's just like opening the Ark of the Covenant. So.
Well, who in 1973 would think, 50 years from now, 43 years from now, whatever, people will be, listening to this show and pulling it apart and wanting more of it and, information on how the shows were written and composed. And I don't think anybody would have thought that.
Probably didn't even think anybody would be watching the show.
Right.
Let alone that it would really be respected as, I guess there's controversy about the whether Star Trek Animated is considered quote unquote canon, but any fans of the show that go back that far, anytime you have the original actors talking to each other and interacting as those characters, it's precious. And probably pound for pound, if you just look at every Star Trek series on its own, and if you were to say rate every episode and then come up with an average, probably the animated show would have maybe the highest rating of every series. It's got the fewest percentage of kind of clunker episodes.
Yeah, exactly.
All the series. It's really just, and of course it was really groundbreaking as Saturday morning fare to be that intelligent and to really challenge children intellectually and with scientific ideas and things like that. Nothing like the garbage that they put on today. Just way ahead of its time. So now when you look at it, it's just Star Trek. It just happens to be presented in a different medium.
Well, even compared to what was on at the time, we watched a clip of one of the, they used to do the half-hour television shows on Friday nights to tell you about the new cartoons that are coming on Saturday morning. And it was sort of, I think it was one of the Osmond kids was doing this sort of Carnival Barker sort of thing, and they were singing about all the different shows. And then they get to the Star Trek clip, and it was season 2, and it was the Orion Traders episode where Spock is dying, Kirk is arguing the Prime Directive in his head. Should he give the Orion pirates their the dilithium and trade it for the cure that will save Spock? And then they cut back and they go to the Munsters, and it was just like it was such a strange tonal shift that you're just like, wow, okay. So it was so obviously a different show, and I think that was part of the problem that they had with marketing it. It was like everybody watched it, more older children and adults, and society wasn't set up in the same way we are now, where we have multi-million-dollar superhero movies and sci-fi on TV all the time, and it just wasn't as respected.
Well, and of course, looking at it now with the sort of the larger history of Star Trek, you just see, how much care went into it. Dorothy Fontana was the story editor and kind of like the showrunner. You had top science fiction writers writing scripts for it. So, there was just a lot of verisimilitude, and the people involved really wanted to get Star Trek back out there and back on TV. And so just because, they had this format, did not, really change their passion for it. And in fact, there was much, much, much more you could do in an animated show in terms of showing the strange new worlds and the creatures and everything, than what you had on a live action TV budget in the 60s. So, when you go back and look at it, it's kind of indispensable as Star Trek, to me at least.
Do you know anything about, I guess we kind of talked about that how the original music was recorded? I guess we know it was in Paris, I think.
Yeah, it was France, and It was recorded to tape, I guess. We just haven't found those tapes. That was pretty. It wasn't anything. I don't think it was anything fancy. I don't know the story behind it. If they said, "Hey, we just want," it was probably we want 30 minutes of music. I'm hoping it was 30 minutes of music because that's what I could find. And they said, "Hey, we need some action. We need some mystery, and just go from there. We need a main title."
And I think Ray's son Mark said that there was a lot more band members than they normally would have for an animated film, just because they were in that same mode of it's Star Trek and we want to do this right.
Well, you would know. Filmation took this very seriously, didn't they? I mean, which was great. Yeah, this was a prestige project.
Yep, it was the most expensive cartoon on television at the time too.
Was it really?
Yeah, just mostly because of the actors. Mm-hmm. But the writers' strike at the time really helped solidify them getting good science fiction writers and some of the original writers, because nobody was allowed to write for live action, but because of the guild, they were allowed to write one animated episode.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yep. So they were able to get all these people in that just didn't have anything to do. It's like, hey, you want to write a Star Trek script? And they're like, yeah, great, I can get paid. So they would do that, and that's how they got the original writer from for the first episode was the one who also wrote The Cage. Gene
Roddenberry wrote The Cage. Was
no, yeah, sorry, the Brand No Man Has Gone Before.
Yes, yeah, came in. But that's fascinating. So it really kind of was the perfect storm.
Yeah, if that strike hadn't happened, who knows what those stories would have been like? That could have been.
Yeah, it would have been
show.
Like, the Partridge Family 2200 AD.
You are maybe the only one who actually knew, because we use that as an audio clip in our intro.
Really?
And yes. Yeah, we sort of strung together all of these little bits and pieces that sort of make a narrative. And, we played that, and they're like, what is the 2200 AD thing? And it's like, it's Partridge Family. Partridge Family was in space?
Actually, it was a thing, believe it or not. So
yes.
We've made some progress.
Well, there was a story about, I guess that was supposed to be a sequel to the Jetsons originally, and it was going to be Judy was going to be like a reporter, and I think that Elroy was going to be like a college sports star or something like that, and I guess the rights fell through, but they still had all the art and stuff started, so they transitioned the Partridge Family into the future for some reason. And many years later, Shirley Jones was asked, how she felt about not being on the show, and she's like, "What show? What are you talking about?" She didn't know it existed. They didn't even ask her.
I wasn't aware it existed, but that seems to be the trend.
You are now, Neil.
I'm going to go to YouTube as soon as this is over. That seems to be the trend, to take a popular show at the time. They don't really do this anymore. And it's like, hey, let's make a Happy Days show, but let's add in a time machine.
Yeah,
they were always making them sci-fi for some reason.
Well, then you can do more fantastical things, I guess. I don't know how interesting Happy Days would be just drawn.
Right. Yeah. So, but there was Gilligan's Planet as well. Yeah.
And the Brady Kids.
Yeah, the Brady Kids had they had that bird that talked, didn't they?
Merlin, and then they had the racially insensitive Ping and Pong the Pandas.
You're really, having me dust off the mental Rolodex here, so cut this if it's not true. But do I also remember Josie and the Pussycats in Outer Space?
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay.
That was I remember that.
Josie in outer space. Pussycats are all in place. Off on another chase. Mars stars the Milky Way when they're grooving, who can say? Buckle up your seatbelts. They could be in orbit in the stars. On a spooky planet, maybe Mars. There's no way of knowing when they're grooving way above the atmosphere, trying to get back to him. They're backing off.
So we needed Star Trek animated. That's what it comes down to. We really needed it, and so to have sort of a voice of reason out there in the chaos. But to get back to the music,
yes, sorry.
So I because I'm remembering now. I mean, so Neil presented me with this.
And I'm so sorry for that.
But and I was blown away by just what he did. But what I got was an assembly with hundreds of edits in it, where it would go from episode to episode to episode to episode with what he had isolated as what hopefully was the best sounding bit, stitched together to recreate the composition. So the levels constantly changed, the EQ constantly changed, the noise level constantly changed, and now it was up to me to kind of go through this and make it sound like none of that was going on. And it took time. I mean, it took more time than I would normally have to spend on something like that, where even if something's in bad shape, it's usually consistently bad shape all the way through the piece. If something's hissy or something's dull or if something's muddy, you kind of just figure out where to go, and you do some dynamic work as you move through something to make things louder, softer. You're less aware of hiss, for example, when the music's loud than obviously when it's quiet. Your signal to noise ratio they become closer together. So, so it was a process of doing that and then checking the work and going back 2-3 times to see if there's anything I can do. There have been times in the past where stems are used as a source and put out there if nothing else exists. And the sort of the euphemism that's used within the industry for this technique of raising and lowering the music for dialogue is called potting, which means you actually you have your hand on a fader and moving it up and down, and you bring it down so that you could hear somebody speaking. You're balancing all the components. So therefore, when we do something comes from a stem, we use the term unpotting. So looking at it as a digital waveform helps because you can physically see that things are now looking like they're not dipped for dialogue. But you also have to listen because, again, the whole EQ or how they attenuate the music it varied from episode to episode. So it's a matter of really trying to smooth out all of those bumps. And as the work progressed, I was really pleased with the results. And I started feeling this is really working. And I didn't master it, so my job was to just sort of complete a pre-master version of each track that had all of those problems taken care of. And I found it quite listenable, and I'm like, this is actually really satisfying. I'm listening to the music from the animated Star Trek. So then I gave that assembly back to Neil for review, and he can tell you what he thought of it.
No, it was stunning, because we've talked about this since. Like, it still doesn't exist. It's not, this is just a recreation that we did, but it works. As Mike said, we were able to go in and figure out exactly how these things were. We hope that I would love for someday for the masters to actually show up and put up what we did against them and see what we got right and what we got wrong. But I'm very convinced that we got most of it right. That you could stitch these things together. For instance, at the end of More Troubles, there's that playful cue. And there were two different versions of that. And there were two versions of that in the episode, and I had no idea that it was part of a longer piece. So I took those two things and I put them up together, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is a completely different performance. How many of these jokey cues did they record? But suddenly I had two versions of it, and then working down, I got to a later episode where they played that almost in full, that entire, and I went, oh my goodness, here it is, and this is why there's two different bits, because they recorded that thing, the whole cue has these two little sections in it, and they just cut them out and moved them, and I was able to put it together and go, hey, now we have this whole long cue, and then, there were I remember there were volume issues with it, as there always were. There were very few cues that didn't have volume. I don't think there were any. They were all screwed up in that recording. I felt so bad passing this on to Mike. I'm like, well, here you go, Mike. Have fun.
Well, then the next thing, which was really the most fun part for me, the satisfying thing, was that, as Neil told you at the beginning, looking at the cue sheets, we had no idea what any of this music was called.
Right.
So I get to be the one to take credit for titling these tracks.
That was one of my next questions.
And I just said, well, what do I do? I says, I'm gonna imagine that this is like just the greatest Star Trek episode ever made, and without saying anything about what the plot of that episode is, I'm just gonna listen to each track and see what the first thing that comes into my mind is for what kind of scene it goes with. So it's kind of like doing. It was kind of like our version of what they used to create library music for back in the silent film era. You know, where you'd have, little old lady at a piano in front of the theater, and she'd have a piece called Suspense. She'd have a piece called Chase. She'd have a piece called Walking or Thinking or Love Scene, things like that. So I mean, you just had kind of generic titles, but now I could do that, but in the world of Star Trek. So I just came up with them, and then I've heard from Neil, and then I heard from Jeff Bond, who has written a lot of liner notes about Star Trek and has written a book about the music of Star Trek, and then from Darren Doctorman, who's an associate of ours on a lot of projects and is an artist and special effects guy, all telling me how much they love the titles. And I was able to make some little puns and little jokes in there that I thought worked, and I just had really a lot of fun doing that, and I was very glad that some of these real top Star Trek fans, and by the way, I hate using the word fans. I actually think of us as students. We actually study and learn from the things that we love. So it passed sort of that committee. And I was very happy about that. It was very satisfying. And some of the ones came up that there was like this little cue that has these two sort of offbeat notes going back and forth. And the first thing popped into my mind is Spock is giving a report. And so I called it Spock's Analysis. Then later on, there's one where the tempo's a little faster, so I called it Spock's Quick Analysis.
That's actually my favorite title. I was going to mention that. It's Spock's Quick Analysis. Again, when I passed this stuff on to Mike, I had come up, it had all been cut and assembled, and I'd come up with a playlist. I'd already put it all in order, but I didn't have any titles for any of it. So it was just 01, 02, 03, 04. It was 40 tracks of just 01, of just numbers. And it was Mike who came up with the titles, and it all fit, and CBS even approved them.
I loved, I think my favorite was Mr. Eric's Lends an Extra Hand.
Well, of course.
And Don't Mess with Emrys.
Yes.
So, and then I think, Neil, I don't know that I think I did do this deliberately. I used Kirk, Spock, and McCoy each in there. So, and I think you'd commented about that. So, but apart from that, it's just kind of like you could now almost make a new animated episode, and when you need that certain scene, you can just look at for the track that has that title, and the music will fit.
Did you arrange the titles like in a way that might make for a more pleasant listening experience, or was it sort of done more in just the order that it was mostly done in the show?
No, it was absolutely listening experience.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of got the sense that there's a main program, and again, I think Neil kind of took this approach that let's just sort of score like the greatest Star Trek episode ever with this music. Then there were sort of the bits and bobs and the stuff that was used less often, and little stingers and little bumpers, and
I love those stingers, by the way.
Little alternates and that kind of thing. But you really get the sense in listening to it that, okay, here's where Captain Kirk is doing his log entry. Okay, here's where everything's going along peacefully, and then suddenly they come around an asteroid and there's something, an energy cloud or a Klingon ship or something. It's like, okay, now here's where they're being chased. Okay, here's where they're firing the weapons. So it's all the sort of the standard tropes of a typical Star Trek episode. You kind of get that. You just feel like you're just on a Star Trek adventure through the music in the main program. I just thought he did a spectacular job of figuring out how to assemble it, so that kind of comes your collective memory of the entire series just gets sort of summarized in one listen.
And the interesting thing is you listen to it and it doesn't have that repetitive feeling that you get when you're actually watching the episode.
Oh, that's because they've repeated so many of these cues over and over and over. Like,
that's true. You're only listening to this once. So.
Yeah, it's like, Mike brought it up earlier. You needed someone who had this music drilled into your head. Well, if you watch the show, you only have to watch a few episodes before the music is drilled into your head, because it's 30 minutes of music used repeatedly over and over and over again
for 11 hours of show. So.
Yeah, so if you're inclined, as we are, to maybe pay a little bit more attention to the music while watching these things, it really does get... It's the same thing with the original Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Some of this, since so many of those episodes were tracked, the music just becomes... And you watch them over and over again, you can't help but have them imprinted into your mind.
Yeah.
As evidenced by the fact that sort of the what you think of as like Star Trek brawl music is kind of considered almost a cliche because it was used so much for fight scenes.
Yep.
Exactly.
Even though I think it was originally created with like the Spock Vulcan music, right?
You're talking about the Amok Time fight music?
Right.
And what's interesting about that is it's that music isn't used as much as people think it is. It's only in season 2, and only a handful of times. Certainly Amok Time, I know Bread and Circuses, and maybe Private Little War, don't quote me on that.
Right. This stuff just gets kind of, for some reason, gets into the collective conscious.
Totally.
Like, just for Kirk has never said, "Beam me up, Scotty."
Right.
On Isle of Lucy, Ricky has never said, "Lucy, I'm home," and he's never said, "Lucy, you have some splaining to do." But people get stuff into their heads and they think that it becomes a cliche that never really exists in the first place.
I think the closest he ever got to saying "Beam me up, Scotty" was actually on the animated series.
I was going to say that. Yes, you're right.
To Enterprise. Beam us up, Scotty.
Do you have this all cataloged? Do you have all the clips, like all the familiar clips cataloged, so you can just pull them up?
Yeah.
Oh, that's impressive.
Hey, Neil, why do you think that the theme music was not that we didn't have that?
That's a great question. I don't know. That's the one thing that was not on any of the stems was the opening and closing titles.
Really?
That wasn't. Yeah. Do you know what was on the stems? The stems had next week on Star Trek the animated series. They had the little bumpers. They had those ads, but they didn't have the main they didn't have the titles. That
would actually be interesting to hear. Like, did they have the dialogue of what it was just then edited dialogue?
I don't think it was. I don't think it was ever dialogue. I think it was they were just showing clips.
Oh, okay.
So it was just music playing underneath of it, and explosions or that sort of thing.
What they probably did then was recorded the titles sessions, made the main and titles as as negatives, mixed negatives. Dumped the music, and then just made a print and just spliced it onto every week's episode as it was finished.
Right. Well, what happened, what was interesting, I don't know if I ever told you this, when I went to the studio to pick up the tapes from John Davis, who did the transfers on this, he said, "Oh, wait, I have one more to do." And it was a tape from the 70s labeled main title. So and it was 1/4 inch, and he put this tape on, and as soon as he put it on, I'm like, well, that's the second season main title of Star Trek. That's really not going to help me on this project. But that was the one tape we had labeled main title. So,
and what was the reason why? Do you know if there was an attempt to use the original series theme on this show?
They couldn't, and I think we addressed that. I think that's addressed in the notes where they mention.
I think it's because Filmation had their own. It was like the Shermley Music Corporation or something like that, and they had to have their own music on. I don't know if there was a legal reason for that. But
must have had their own publishing company.
That's exactly what it was, and it says here they were solely responsible for the music, so no themes could be reused from the original series. So.
Not having to then, there would have been royalties had to be paid to Roddenberry and Alexander Courage if they'd done that as well.
Right.
And Gene was unaware, apparently, when he heard it, that there even was a new theme. He was just like, it had enough of the feeling to it that he just didn't even pay attention to it.
Right. Well, he paid attention when the checks didn't start showing up.
Well, yeah.
And visually, it's the same main titles for the most part.
Yeah, we
and it's
talked
funny
about that.
Like Darren, whom I mentioned earlier, that was his first Star Trek that he had exposure to as a kid.
At me as well.
So when he saw the live action show, he was kind of like, well, where's the other theme song?
And it's interesting because of Darren that we have the main titles on our sets.
Where did he get them from?
I should I reveal? I'll reveal it now.
I don't know that I even know it, so go ahead.
Oh, I borrowed his Laserdiscs. He had the Laserdisc box because I didn't want to. They're like, "Oh, rip the DVD," and I'm like, "No, it's compressed. It's Dolby Digital. I don't want to do that." So I got the Laserdiscs and we transferred them in high res, just the audio.
Nice.
And we did a few because the main and end titles are the exact same piece of music. So we recorded in a bunch of end titles from the show, and then I just compared them, and that's how I realized, wait, one of them doesn't have the overlay for whatever reason. So that's how we wound up with, and they're both from the Laserdisc, and it was just that was blind luck.
That's right, I remember that now. Yeah,
that I discovered a slightly different version of the title. I thought, well, that's cool.
Yeah,
because I know that had we not included that version, someone would have mentioned on the internet, "Hey, where's the version of the end titles without the overlay?"
Oh, they always get you.
You just go, what? What's overlay?
And some of the content of this 50th anniversary compilation is a response to things that we've been taking to the mat over. Like the ending credits of Star Trek II, they wanted it without Nimoy's vocal. There was Star Trek: The Motion Picture had a track where the wind machine needed to be louder. So some of the content on this set, along with all the great music from the other shows. We have some tracks that are there for that reason to kind of fill in the holes and in response to, the friendly complaints that we usually get on every single release.
Yeah. So
are you saying that Star Trek fans complain about things? I never encountered that.
It isn't just Star Trek. No, I mean soundtrack fans in general. If you leave it the same, they complain. If you change it, they complain. So there's nothing that you can do other than go by your own lights to do the best job you can. And I take this approach, and I think I've taught Neil the same, that your attitude has to be that this may never be worked on again by anyone. So get it right.
Since you have the stems, you said it was the audio or the dialogue, the music, and the special effects. Is that correct? The special effects were separately?
The effects track, yeah.
Or the effects track, sorry. Is there any chance of ever releasing the effects? I know some of them are similar to TOS.
Who would want to cut it?
Okay.
Yeah. No.
I can see
is there demand for sound effects?
There's a TOS sound effect disc, so I figured somebody would have demand for it.
Yeah.
Well, they had access to some of those effects, as I recall, for the show anyway, so there was some, obviously some new ones. I mean,
right.
There's that sort of that screeching animal that's used, it seems like, in every cartoon show from that era.
The flying, the plant birds and the...
Yep.
Right, yeah. So, I mean...
the Philosian...
yeah, I don't know that there's that
much
of demand.
Yeah, I mean, and that would be, again, another task of just sitting there and cutting it all apart. It would be,
yeah, for the 120 people who would want it, yeah.
Exactly.
Well, rest assured that the stems exist and they're in good condition, and the studio has them and they're in great shape. So
and because they exist, where they were able to do actual 5.1 mixes for the show for video release. But it's more TLC than you would expect a show like any other show like that to get from a studio. So
Yeah.
Kudos to them for taking good care of it.
So was there anything that you wish that you could have done that was like cost prohibitive or technically prohibitive?
For the animated series?
For the animated series. I know there's a lot more on this disc, but I want to leave that to our actual music expert, Brandon Shea-Matala on the network.
Yeah, I think that there wasn't anything on this where I said, "Oh, I can't believe we have to lose this." We got everything I wanted on there. I don't think.
Yeah, and it's not like we could have even said, "Oh, too bad we couldn't hire 3-4 other music editors to, shoulder some of the burden." It could not have been done by anybody else. That's the thing. It's all of us who just really love Star Trek and have been involved with all the music of Star Trek for the last 8 years, and had a passion for kind of filling this hole. It could not have been done by anybody else, so we just needed the time to do it and to find within ourselves the sort of the fortitude to keep going until it was done. So, I mean, there was really no other way to do it, and I think we got it right.
Yeah,
definitely. And as a graphic designer, I know that sometimes putting more people on a project does not actually help.
Right.
Yeah, we did have I guess sort of the Star Trek Supreme Court listening to this. So it was Lucas, it was Mike, it was me, it was Darren and Jeff. And we all came to the conclusion that, yeah, this is it. This works. So
awesome. Yeah, it was like I'm tongue tied. It was so good. No, it was so nice to actually have somebody even pay attention to the animated series and not either begrudgingly or jokingly or something like that. Just because it's a show that, like I said, I was first introduced to the animated series. I jokingly said that I would be confused when you would see the different intros. I wouldn't know if it was live action or animation because they look so similar to a small child. And I'd be like, oh, this isn't the animated one, or oh, this is not the live action one. But yeah, no, I just appreciate all the care that you took to it. And,
yeah, I mean, there's sort of a tendency out there to think of it as sort of the bastard stepchild of Star Trek, and to us, it's not.
No, you can't tell the Star Trek story without talking about the animated series.
And there's a lot of things in there that became, as much as people want to begrudge the canon idea, you have Spock's history. You have the first time a Klingon cloaking device was mentioned. It
introduced the holodeck.
Yep. So
it introduced the Balloon Enterprise. Where would we be without that?
I want that to show up somewhere.
I like that episode, The Practical Joker.
Yeah, me too. You're like, Kirk is a jerk. Yeah.
Kirk is a jerk.
Yep. And it's kind of, if you want to actually dive into that, where it's really hard to do that with like the average 70s cartoon, you can talk about, did they create a sentient life form? Was undoing it something that they should have done? There's actually morals, messages, and meanings that you can pull out of these shows that are a lot harder than a Scooby-Doo episode.
Right. So I mean, yeah, so it really is Star Trek.
Yep.
And don't let anybody tell you different.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here. This has been incredible. I'm so glad that the music is out, and we will have a link to that in the show notes. And it is a lot more than just the animated series. That's one thing I didn't mention. There is, we were talking about, there is the motion picture piece. There's a lot of, believe it was the Voyager test music or
Jerry's demos.
Yeah. Those were really
stuff from the experience. It's a really nice collection. It fills in a lot of holes that really we couldn't otherwise have done. So, probably animated on its own might have made an okay release. You try to get to 40 minutes, and it's like it's hard to sell an entire release from a stem, no matter how much work goes into fixing it up. But so this was just the perfect place to release it, and it fills in a lot of the gaps of those odds and ends of that couldn't come out on their own. Lucas and Ford Thaxton, put together a really good collection of material here.
Yeah, it was great. So, okay, that was horrible the way I said that. That's not a good way to end a show. All right.
Yeah, so really good release for the 50th anniversary.
I agree, and thank you both so much for being here in the Wood Panel Den. It was great to have you, and, I don't think we'll probably ever have another animated disc to talk about, but if we do, you're definitely welcome back, or maybe just have you back to talk about your experiences with Star Trek as a kid.
Sure.
That'd be fun. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron.
All right, thank you so much. That was a lot of fun. We actually recorded on Saturday morning, so it truly was Saturday Morning Trek. With the holidays right around the corner and quickly passing us at Warp 10, the Star Trek 50th Anniversary Collection, musical rarities from across the Star Trek universe, limited edition 4-CD set, would make a great gift. Just head over to LaLaLand Records and check it out. Aside from the animated series, there's a motion picture track, the Star Trek II Wrath of Khan end titles without narration, previously unreleased scores from Star Trek The Next Generation, and the original score from Star Trek The Experience in Las Vegas. But talking about the impossible isn't the only thing we've been doing on Trek FM this week. Here's a listen to some of the things you may have missed elsewhere on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm. To the journey!
Yeah, that's what happened to the Equinox crew, actually. We never did find out what happened to them, but in my headcanon, they're actually in little hamster wheels down in engineering, making the ship go a little faster.
Faster, Mr. Lessing, faster!
Melodic Treks.
Now, both of those tracks make me think of Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I definitely think you're kind of right there. I'm not ashamed to admit that I have only ever seen the 4th Indiana Jones movie.
Dear Lord.
Meta Treks.
And that's the world of language that we live in. It's not this purely referential sense of language. Like when Riker says a minuet, he doesn't just mean, oh, yeah, that thing minuet that I can point to, whatever that is on the holodeck, right?
The 17th century French dance. Maybe he wants to dance.
Riker wants to bust a move.
Saturday Morning Trek. When she did the psychic girl?
Yes.
Like that one where I was just like, really, Nichelle?
Yeah.
Like that is the direction that you want to go? Like,
They are putting a device in the warp control room. Oh no!
like I was just, oh man, but you could tell it was Nichelle. And I was laughing so hard at that. It was so much fun. And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out the shows and get in on the daily Trek Talk. You'll find them at iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, and the Windows Podcast Directory for Xbox and Zune. You can visit our website at Trek.fm and view our podcast directory and stream all of our shows right from the website. We'd also like to invite you to leave us a rating and review in iTunes. Not only does it help us know how we're doing, it also helps other people find the show. And this month, it might help you win a TAS Blu-ray. Between December 2nd, 2016 and January 2nd, 2017, if you leave us a review in the iTunes store, your name goes into a hat to win the awesome new set of the animated series on Blu-ray, thanks to Patreon patron Joo Kim. Before we go, I'd like to thank our patrons, Mike Bovia, Eric Extreme, and Joo Kim. Thank you so much for your support. And if you want to become an associate producer of a Trek FM show, all you need to do is become a patron of the network at the $25 or more level. Go to patreon.com/TrekFM and find out how you can become part of the team. That's patreon.com/TrekFM. Well, I think I'm going to go put on the TAS disc and kick back in my beanbag here in the wood panel den with my Quisp cereal and listen to some tunes. All right, let's try Fire Phasers. There's something very familiar about this. Oh, and remember, there is an animated series. Soundtrack.